Thank you for those who have already logged on. We really appreciate AEDC and Julie here with Visit Anchorage and just being able to kind of collectively log in online, although it's not in person. It's still great to just kind of share and connect with each other. So thank you. We, Alaska Executive Search and Bradison Management Group, are super happy to be a part of this. So thank you, Spencer, and I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah. Well, welcome to this month's edition of the AEDC Voice webinar. We host these webinars the second Wednesday of every month at 10 a.m. And I want to extend a big thank you to AEDC Investors, Alaska Executive Search, and Bradison Management Group for their generous sponsorship of this series. Today, we're going to be hearing from Julie Saupe, the President and CEO of Visit Anchorage. Julie got her start in tourism at the Fairbanks Visitor Center as a summer job, and since then, she has worked for tourism organizations in Fairbanks and the Matanuska-Susitna Borough. She holds leadership roles with the Alaska Travel Industry Association Board and Marketing Committee, serves on the Destinations International Accreditation Board, and serves ex officio roles with the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce and with our organization, the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation. And before I turn it over to Julie, I just want to say, if you have questions during the webinar that you want me to ask her, just feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to get them in before the end. And with that, Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Terrific. Thank you, Spencer. I'm happy to be here, happy to have been invited. And as I get started, let's see if I can do a successful screen share. And I'll give that a minute. Katie or Spencer, can you give me a thumbs up that we're where we need to be?
We're up and it looks great.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, as I said, I'm really happy to be here today and appreciate those who've logged in, who have an interest in tourism, in joining us today as well. I'm going to just really give an update of where we are right now, talk a little bit about the year that we're coming out of. Let's hope that we continue coming out of 2020 and continue on the growth pace that we're on right now. We're still have a ways to go, but it is encouraging for those of you who've been downtown this summer to see visitors on the sidewalks again is absolutely fantastic. So thank you for inviting me to speak, and also for those Alaskans, thank you for what you've done and the concern that you've had for tourism over this past year. I really feel like the community stuck together and embraced tourism over the past year with an understanding of what our visitor industry was facing. So thank you for what you do for one another, for us, and locally supporting businesses. Anyone who ordered takeout last year, who very purposefully planned a staycation or planned a visit to a local attraction because you knew they were struggling, it was noted and appreciated by the visitor industry. And I encourage you to keep doing all of that because we're not out of the woods yet. And it's very encouraging to know that we've had the support of Alaskans, and we felt it very strongly over this past year. And I heard from a lot of you travelers who rediscovered Alaska. And if you weren't one of those who did that last year, do it this year. Our destination is fantastic, and you owe it to yourself to get out and discover the respite and reprieve that you can get from just enjoying our own fantastic destination and state. So as I said, that's been very heartening, as are some of the more recent numbers that we're seeing, also very heartening. I'm going to do just a brief look at 2020, a year unlike any other, and that is probably the understatement of the year for tourism, and I know for many of your businesses as well. There were many challenges from 2020. I won't speak of everything, and a lot of the numbers that you see in front of you will speak for themselves. Obviously, the 57% decline in throughput at the Anchorage International Airport is not all leisure or convention travelers. But certainly it was a significant amount of leisure and convention travelers that contributed to that decline for the Anchorage International Airport. But we are encouraged right now as we're seeing increasing numbers out at the airport, increasing travelers. And I'm sure that I'm unlike many of you, but if I go to the airport and I have to stand in line right now, I'm kind of happy about it because it means that we're seeing more travelers. So maybe that will give you a different perspective next time you have to stand in line at the airport. It means that there's more money from visitors flowing into our community. You see there on the slide that hotel demand was down 33%. And perhaps that surprises you a bit. When I saw that number at the end of the year for 2020, that it was 33% down, I was surprised that it wasn't even more than that. And the one thing that we have to remember about 2020 in Anchorage is we were actually helped from a hotel perspective by quarantining workers, whether it was seafood workers, whether it was oil workers, or whether it was medical and hospital workers who chose to quarantine in their own community. That helped our hotels last year. It was not the market that we wanted, but it was a helpful market. And not only were these folks renting hotel rooms, but their stays were long, 14-day stays for quarantining workers. And so that did prop up at least that sector of the tourism industry. And that stat right below the demand, you see hotel revenue was down 52%. So that's significantly larger than the demand at 33%. What that is an indication of is that rates, what the hotels were able to charge for each room night was down even greater than occupancy was down. So in 2020, bed taxes for Anchorage, our lodging tax, brought in $13.1 million. That's down 57% from a banner year of 2019. To put a dollar figure around it, we dropped to $13 million from $31 million the year prior. And that affects the general fund for the city, that affects the Visit Anchorage's budget, that also affects the operations and the funding mechanism for the convention centers. The bed taxes are split among those three entities. We also had $13 million in lost economic value of meetings that canceled in 2020. I'll talk a little bit more about the meetings market in a bit. The one thing I can tell you of that lost economic value, we worked very hard as Visit Anchorage. The hoteliers worked hard, the convention centers worked hard, and at this point we have recovered or at least rebooked about 2/3 of that business for future years. So while it was lost in 2020, eventually, whether it's in 2021, 2022, or beyond, we'll see at least 2/3 of that business come back, and we're still working on the other third. In tourism, we lost 4,500 jobs. About a quarter of the jobs in tourism were lost in 2020. And that takes us back to the year 2000. So we lost 20 years of job growth in about 3 months when the pandemic hit. And of course, as everybody's realizing right now, growing the workforce back is proving to be extremely challenging. And we'll talk a bit more about that as well. 2020 was just a tremendous burden on our community, and tourism, I believe, bore some of the worst of it, economically speaking. A statewide survey that was just released from McKinley Research, many of you probably know them, formerly known as McDowell, suggests just how bad it was. Of the tourism businesses surveyed, 75% had to apply for government assistance programs, 65% hired no staff, 60% cut back on their marketing, 57% canceled upgrades, improvements, investments into the future of their business, and 52% laid off or furloughed staff. So as I said, we lost a significant number of jobs, and we're working hard to now reattract and retain that workforce. Our response at Visit Anchorage and in the tourism industry, first and foremost, was preserve, protect, and prepare. We scaled back on our programs and our spend. In some cases, it just didn't make sense to spend some of the planned programs as visitors weren't traveling. In some cases, programs were canceled on us. The first thing we did under the Preserve and Protect was we cut our staff back significantly. We laid off or furloughed almost 70% of our staff back in April of 2020. We're slowly growing back. We have just under 50% of our 2019 staff back at work, and we hope to see that growth continue as the staff that we have right now is exhausted. So, but it's great to be busy, and it's great to be some of the fruits of our labor returning as well. We also spent quite a bit of time really understanding how travel is going to change as we come out of the pandemic, where we cut on some of our marketing where it didn't make sense, where we cut our travel budget because those opportunities had disappeared. We were able to invest some in spending on research so that we could follow and see what trends, see how the travelers were changing, see what messaging they were most responsive to, understand how the visitors of the future would change just a bit, and also understand when it made sense to be in the market and when it didn't make sense to spend money in the market. And so I feel like we were very responsive to the needs of the moment, the opportunities of the moment, and also responsive in understanding where the opportunities had disappeared and not putting money out where we weren't going to get any return. Certainly from a staff perspective, we continued marketing where it made sense, but we really spent a lot of staff time working with community partners on industry support, on advocacy, working with our elected officials to make sure they understood what the visitor businesses were facing and where their needs were. And then also in-state promotions. And I mentioned in the introduction, I really felt like Alaskans were very responsive. We had a stay and play program. There was a statewide initiative to encourage Alaskan travel, and other communities throughout Alaska were doing the same thing. And it was very rewarding to see that bear some success. Some of our businesses said that they definitely saw an increase in in-state travel. Some businesses said about 60% of their 2020 business was from Alaskans, which was significantly up. More typical, it's 30 to 35%. And they also said that in talking with their customers, the Alaskans who were visiting, that the Alaskans were very purposeful and had heard the messaging that tourism was asking them to come support and enjoy Alaska. Also during 2020, because we were spending less in market, we were able to revise our tools and look at our toolbox and prepare for a changing travel industry. And we'll share some of those tools in just a bit, just to give you a sense of what we're doing now and how we're speaking to our potential visitors. I guess one of the big takeaways for us in 2020 was that we feel like all doubt was removed that tourism is important to our community. Tourism matters. In 2020, we saw our community without tourism. And part of it is economics. A big part of it is economics and the visitor economy and the money that they bring. But I think we also saw the vibrancy that tourism brings to our community. And we saw what downtown looks like without visitors in the summertime. We missed all of the hot dog vendors. We missed the music and the concerts in the park that are for residents, but also for visitors. And so I think it brought everybody in the tourism industry to an even greater appreciation of the value that we don't bring to the visitors we serve, but the value that we bring to the residents. So in tourism, we like to say that we represent the tourism industry, that we serve the visitors, but the work we do is really for the benefit of the residents. And some of the examples for Visit Anchorage in 2020 was we had the chance, the opportunity for the first time ever to become administrators for a grants program, and that was very gratifying. That was through the municipality in partnership with them. We also developed the Healthy Anchorage Pledge, which provided guidelines, best practices for different sectors of the industry on how to manage through COVID, but a lot of those best practices will stay with us for years now, I'm sure. We also built business relationships and organizational partnerships like never before, and I believe and I really hope that these partnerships outlast COVID by many, many years. These are partnerships that have been strengthened with AEDC, for example, Chamber of Commerce, and businesses and other nonprofits throughout the community that really came together to talk about the recovery and what was needed very initially, but now we've changed our efforts from initial response to long-term recovery. And there's some great alliances that have been built. And Visit Anchorage has been very happy to be a part of those and look forward to continuing those into the future. I'll also say that for what was a super challenging year, we did work to put ourselves in the best possible position to be ready when the time was right, to re-invite visitors to our community, to start talking to meeting planners again. Not that we ever stopped talking to them, but to start getting contracts and bids out to them again, and really focusing on business development to the future. So what could have been a lost year really was an opportunity for us to relook at everything that we're doing and relook at how travel is changing and figure out the best moves for us to get the best outcomes into the future. So where we stand, obviously things are starting to reopen locally, or really have reopened locally, and that's very encouraging. Right now, so much in the future is still contingent on big developments in the wider world. Government relations, from policies set forth by the CDC to other national, state, and local agencies, and to international travel restrictions. Foremost among those is the Canadian border closure, which still persists, and we're anxious for the day when that is lifted. Moving beyond policies, we know that travel success is dependent on successfully addressing COVID. And we all have a part to play as individuals, as business leaders, and as healthy hosts and citizens. Suffice it to say, we're keeping a very close eye on new strains like the Delta variant that has upended reopening plans in places like the UK. This is not the time to take our eye off the ball. So I'm asking, don't let your guard down. Keep doing what needs to be done. We are encouraged by the statewide and local Sleeves Up for Summer initiatives. We have a continued need to demonstrate that we have a safe, conscious place that people can travel with confidence. Currently, there's other cause for optimism, though the road to total recovery is still longer than we'd like. And that optimism ebbs and flows on almost a daily basis still. We know that independent travel is a key in the near term, and the return of group and cruise travel is returning slowly. And we know that for our area, cruises will not return until next year at the earliest, although we're feeling very confident about their return in 2022. So in early 2021, we've made some good gains. Hotel demand in May was up more than 80% year over year. It's still short of the high water marks set in 2019. So we're not back to pre-COVID performance, but we certainly are making some very good gains. So some green shoots and some continued challenges. So we are very excited about strong airlift into Anchorage. If any of you have looked to travel yourselves, you see that we've got a very robust air schedule. We've got some airlines that have returned to Anchorage after a year, or in some cases 7 years away. And it's very encouraging to see that strong airlift return. Confidence in the safety of traveling continues to increase by US consumers. In the course of the 3 most recent months, we have seen an improvement of 20 percentage points in the confidence of safe travels by American consumers. More than 70% of American travelers say that they are excited and open to new trips in the near term, and they want to be inspired by advertising. It's nice to know that people are looking for inspiration through destination marketing right now. Search engines, email campaigns, and social media do remain the top channels that Americans say they would be most receptive to learning about new destinations. And I'm happy to say that Visit Anchorage is very well positioned to capture interest across all of those channels. So for summer 2021, are we looking at it as glass half empty or glass half full? We definitely still have our work cut out for us, and there are lots of mixed signals about what's happening now and what's in store. As I said, South Central cruises won't return until 2022. We're super excited for our friends in Southeast, though, that have welcomed their first cruise ships back this week. But in any case, in Anchorage, because of the cruise lines not coming back to South Central, we'll be missing out on about 40% of our summer overnight visitation that would typically take place by cruise travelers. But the good news in that is Anchorage is less reliant on cruise than other parts of Alaska. And pre-pandemic, anywhere between 50 and 60% of our overnight visitation already was from independent travelers. So we have a lot to offer. We have many ways to explore, and we have solid connections to core markets. So I think that makes us maybe a bit more resilient and more adaptive this year than some of the other parts of the state that were much more reliant on cruise travel. And as I mentioned, the airlift into Anchorage is one good sign for optimism. And many people are excited to travel, or at least excited to start thinking about traveling again. And interest in Alaska remains very high. The early summer performance has been encouraging already. Our destination aligns very well with the stated desires of the new traveler, which is outdoors, parks, and scenic beauty. And it's a pretty easy statement to make that Anchorage ticks off all of those boxes and ticks them off very well. Just like other sectors, though, we do have a real challenge in finding enough staff and employees to fully staff the businesses that are open. Early on, say February, March, there was still much uncertainty about what this summer would look like. If it would look like last summer, or if it would start a return to looking more like 2019. And so businesses that maybe had the opportunity to staff up chose not to staff up perhaps as high as they needed. And then some businesses were really uncertain and did not hire staff at all, or if they tried to hire staff, they hit a point where there was nobody available. So I know many of you face these same challenges. For tourism, it is one of the greater challenges for summer 2021. And of course, we like to do everything we can to make sure the customers, the visitors who've taken their time and money to visit us have a great experience. And the staffing challenges make that an even greater challenge than in a normal year. Many of you have also heard about the rental car challenge. This is not unique to Anchorage, but it definitely is a challenge, not only a challenge for the visitors when they arrive, but it was a marketing challenge because you probably have seen stories of people who were planning a trip and then canceled a trip due to lack of car availability. This was another I won't say a trend, but it was something that we saw early in January or February and tried to get ahead of it from a marketing perspective in addressing all of the ways that you can visit Anchorage without a car. We also started talking to visitor businesses who had shuttles and vans to make sure that those shuttles were going to be staffed and running this year. Our attractions such as the zoo, the Native Heritage Center, any place that was maybe not on a walking route, to encourage them to start thinking how they would serve those visitors without a car as well. We put it out on our blog, and we tried to get the Anchorage without a car information out early. We actually are a very easy destination without a car, but it does take some convincing folks who that's their normal method of traveling to go into a city, rent a car, and tour from there. We have great tour operators who provide day excursions. As I said, we've got shuttles, we've got a variety of ways to get around, and of course we have Uber and Lyft. So traveling experiences and the idea of how to travel in comfort is different for everybody, as is the understanding of what safe travel is right now, and comfort in traveling in a way that people feel like they'll be taken care of and will have a healthy trip. And that also is messaging that we've worked very hard, that Anchorage has been a responsible community, and we've worked very hard with our businesses to make sure that they are equipped to make sure that they're providing the healthiest and safest experience for their visitors as well. Traveler confidence. So as I said, we've really been watching the research, and I've lost track of what week we're in, but we participate in weekly surveys of travelers, traveler confidence, traveler desires, traveler intentions. We must be in a week 60 something, maybe week 70 something. And you can see this is from May. We took a screen capture of this because for the first time, the word cloud on the right, we saw some really good words beat out some of the bad words. Good, excited, happy, ready. It was terrific to see those words in this word cloud get larger and larger and larger by the week, beginning in February. You can still see in that word cloud, though, apprehensive, hesitant, anxious, scared. So it really is a mixed bag out there on where the American traveler is in their journey to returning to traveling. But 45% of American travelers now say that they are confident or very confident in the safety of travel. So it's great to see that level of confidence. But I'll also point out that the graph on the list, on the left, hints that half of American travelers are still kind of in the middle. They are ready to be inspired. They're maybe ready to start planning, but they may still be a few months away from actually traveling. But Americans want more travel inspiration right now. The proportion of American travelers who are highly open to travel content is up to 73.1% this week. So that's very exciting. 8 in 10 American travelers did some travel dreaming or some actual planning towards their next trip. So we are very aggressively out in the market right now, making sure that Anchorage is very visible to them as they start their dreaming and hopefully booking. The pace of recovery for travel right now is uneven. It will vary by segment. As I mentioned earlier, hotels, while they were 33% down last year, they did very well compared to the rest of the industry. And this year, the same. There's some segments that are recovering better than other segments. Obviously, cruise is not recovering in South Central right now, and group business lags as well. So businesses that are geared to group bookings that work primarily with cruise companies or that focus on international travel, and those that rely on meetings and conferences will take quite a bit longer to rebound. They're not having the same year that some other segments of our industry are having. And that's true in Anchorage, but it's broadly true across the rest of the United States as well. Some of you may have seen the article in the Anchorage Daily News late last month with a quote from Josh Howes with Premier Alaska Tours. This is one of those companies that really caters to group travel. His quote was, "It's not as good as we'd like, but it's quite a bit better than last year. And then he added, "It's only the second worst year we've ever had." So for those businesses that are reliant on cruise, international, and business, they really are lagging significantly. And they're going to need continued support from all of the industry to get them back to where they need to be. Many tourism business relief programs are still coming. The Assembly recently provided $3 million for a tourism business relief grant as part of the new ARPA funding package that was passed this spring. That's in addition to $7 million that was dispersed in Anchorage to tourism businesses from the CARES funding. And this has really been critical to our industry. And there's other programs coming, federal initiatives like the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, Restaurant Revitalization Fund. These really have been key to our industry. One of the very big concerns that I had last spring when we really saw things shut down immediately, not knowing how long a recovery it would be, how long the shutdown would last, knowing that it was going into our prime revenue generating season for a lot of our businesses, was what would the face of Anchorage tourism look like in a year, in 2 years, not knowing how long this would last. And would we lose some of our very local, homegrown, very successful businesses that provide a very local, authentic Anchorage and Alaska experience? It was really unknown if those businesses would be able to survive, and if they didn't, what would come in and take their place. So the federal, the state, and the local monies that have supported these businesses has been critical really to maintaining the character and the homegrown, authentic experience that Anchorage can offer. And it was very rewarding to see our government entities respond like they did and understand the threat to tourism and the threat to the way tourism was provided and who provided experiences in the future. And I know that we've lost businesses, we've lost great businesses, but we've also maintained so many of our great businesses as well, to a degree that was unknown last spring. So if anybody here advocated for relief, whether it was for tourism businesses or small business in general, thank you. It's been very critical, and I feel like those businesses that are standing today will continue to stand, and it's with relief that we know we can continue marketing the product and the authentic businesses that Anchorage has built over the years, and those entrepreneurs who took so many risks to know that they were supported. While it has certainly been challenging, and I won't say anybody's thriving, we've survived, and survival right now is a victory in my book. So again, thank you to those of you who supported those businesses, and thank you to those of you who have advocated and who have understood the needs of the tourism industry during this very difficult time. So another segment that we haven't talked much about is conferences after COVID. Meetings halted, meetings just came to an abrupt halt, but sales never stops. And during this time, we were able to rebook $9 million in canceled 2020 conferences for future years. Really pleased with that. We were also, based on a very wise funding model for the convention centers that has been very successful, we were able to continue to improve the convention centers over this time period. Sometimes it's really hard to do some capital projects when the buildings are, so we've continued moving forward with some projects that were already in line, and in some cases accelerated some projects because of the opportunity a closed building presents. And I shouldn't use the word opportunity, but it was a time to make some improvements. The convention centers are supported by 1/3 of the bed tax. And while bed taxes dropped significantly, because the bed taxes have performed so well since the convention centers have opened, there was funding to make sure that we didn't have to completely shutter the buildings, and funding to make sure that we maintained the buildings, and funding to make sure that we continued selling the buildings into the future. So all of that is a win to, and I wasn't one of them, to the very wise people who put the feasibility study and the funding model of the convention centers together to be based on the bed tax. So what is going to happen for meetings in the future? Business travel sentiment has also significantly improved just over the course of this spring. 40% of business travelers in March reported that they were planning on resuming domestic business travel in the next 3 months. And that was up 25% from just the month before. So that's a significant, fast jump. And you may see my background behind me. This is the hotel room. I am one of those business travelers, and I am on my first business trip in about 18 months, coming to you live from Baltimore. And I'm at a convention where there's about 850 in-person delegates, and there's about another 200 who are joining us virtually. And I had a chance to talk to Spencer and Katie pre-meeting, and it's been a fantastic reminder of the benefits of in-person meetings and the shortfalls of Zoom and other virtual meetings. And I think in the future, we'll continue to see more hybrids. But the after-hours meetings, the after-hours conversations, and the between-session conversations really can't be replaced. And I hope that we return to a point where all business travelers, association attendees recognize that and have the chance to safely experience an in-person meeting on their own soon. But I do believe hybrid meetings are going to be a new norm. I believe that there are plenty of good models of Zoom and virtual meetings that are filling a need, but there is still a need for in-person. And so we are looking forward to continuing to book national and international, particularly association meetings into the future. But it will be a little bit of a leg getting that business back to where it was versus probably the leisure traveler, getting them back to where it was. This is just an example of some of the marketing that we do outside, and rising enthusiasm for travel doesn't mean anything unless we actually get travelers to book and come to Anchorage. And so this is one example of some of the messaging that we're putting out there to help visitors understand that they need to book a trip to Anchorage. As things have opened up, people have opened up to travel, and we, as I said, are working hard to ensure that Anchorage is top of mind when people are actually ready. And we do have an alluring place. This picture is proof of that. But travel does not sell itself, and this has always been the case. But it's particularly important in a year where people may have greater hesitation about air travel and be more likely to start with smaller trips, road trips. The return of the road trip throughout the domestic US is very strong. In Anchorage as a long-haul destination, we know that we have to work just a little bit harder and convey the safety message just a little bit more strongly than some other destinations that are a couple-hour drive from major population centers. Thankfully, through some CARES funding, through the bed tax that we are receiving, and now through an ARPA grant and through a state DCC ED grant, we're able to get that money into the marketplace pretty aggressively. So Anchorage's next traveler, inside their mind, top experiences, I mentioned this earlier, scenic beauty, outdoor activities, visiting parklands. We are so well positioned for this traveler. The top resources, visitor guides and official sites like our site, anchorage.net, and then business pages through search engines. The personas that we are targeting right now are adventurous families, trend-seeking, brag-worthy travelers, the Instagrammers of the world, people who like to create a buzz on their own social media channels, and then travelers who otherwise might be going for an international destination, but switching for a domestic destination this year as border closures keep international travel off the docket for right now. Certainly the direct air connections that I mentioned earlier are vital. We are doing everything we can to utilize those air connections and market the ease of getting to Anchorage. I mentioned Visitor's Guide was one of the top resources that the current traveler is using to plan trips. And I know some of you are probably thinking it, and in the industry, we've been thinking it and saying it for probably 15, 20 years now. Like, isn't paper going away? Isn't it time for no more Visitor's Guide? I'll tell you, we don't produce a guide year after year because we're wed to it. We produce a guide year after year, a printed guide, because travelers ask for it and demand it, and it is still one of our most effective tools. Based on some CARES Act funding that we got from the municipality, we were able to produce a guide for 2021. That was uncertain for a bit. And one of the things that we were really able to do was provide new content, new editorial, and reassurances about the health and safety of Anchorage businesses. So this is just one spread from our 2021 guide. We have masks and some of our other images throughout the guide, and talk specifically about how Anchorage responded to COVID-19 and the health and safety measures that our businesses in travel and tourism were taking, that we are concerned about their health when they come visit Anchorage, and that we're doing what we can to make sure that we're providing a good, safe experience. So we were super happy to have the opportunity to address this need in our guide. And we printed 150,000 copies of this guide, and we are going to run out. We weren't sure when we printed it what the demand would be. We do our best to get this guide out in the mail to people in advance of their travel, because research shows that if they have this in advance of their travel, they will plan more nights, more time, more activities in Anchorage. And so every one of these is a little economic engine into itself as we get them out in advance. And we have published this guide at least once a year for 40 years. As I said, we're not just doing it because it's what we do, but we do it because there's a demand for it. And even visitors, once they're in Anchorage, there's a demand for it as well. And we're already planning for the 2022 guide. And I said we did 150,000 copies of this guide. We will run out by October. And given the pent-up demand, the number of phone calls that we're getting now, the number of emails, the number of travel advisors that we're talking to who are planning 2022 programs, will be back up to 350,000 copies for 2022. I think that that's a really encouraging sign for all of us. Some of the other things that we were able to do based on the research we've been watching is we've always, of course, highlighted the Chugach Mountains, our outdoor spaces, but throughout the guide, there's an even greater emphasis on outdoors, on the wide open spaces, on small groups. You know, it's interesting, we spent years generating and collecting images of very crowded, robust bar scenes and restaurant scenes. And now in the last year, we spent a lot of time collecting scenes of just one or two people, of small family groups, of outdoor dining. It's really a switch in the images that we're showing based on the changing traveler preferences. We were also able, one of the things that the new traveler is looking for as well is cultural enrichment and education and well-being, a sense of peace. And for the first time ever in our visitor's guide, we were able to do a land acknowledgement. And we're really pleased with how this turned out and with the reception that it's getting and with the message that it's sending to the travelers who are looking for that well-being and that enrichment piece. One thing that we've always done, but are doing it to a greater degree also, is not just sending summer information to potential summer travelers and winter information to potential winter travelers, but making sure that all travelers, whatever their interest, have a chance to see the other side of Anchorage. So Anchorage by season, we just make sure that people know we're a year-round destination, and particularly with the adventure travel and with the brag-worthy traveler, the personas that we're going after, Alaska in winter really fits that profile. And so we're making sure that we get that information out and in front of potential travelers to maybe consider, oops, there we go, a trip that they hadn't considered before. And the pandemic really provided an opportunity. As I said, we dove into the research to engage with potential travelers and test messages. We did a lot of message testing, a lot of image testing. We used a very well-known destination research firm called Destination Analysts, who reached out to potential travelers with a variety. We had several different campaigns, images, words, messages, and far and away, urban and wild. And these images really spoke to travelers. And these are people who travel a lot, but not necessarily have traveled to Alaska before, to really understand what was going to speak to them as we come out of a year of lockdown. And so these are some of the examples. The work that we do often is not seen by our residents. It's not meant to be seen by our residents, but every once in a while we like to make sure that you see some of what we're doing and how we're representing Anchorage to outside audiences. And of course, we're constantly monitoring the results, and we're very pleased so far with what's happened, especially in the last 2 or 3 months, with our search engine results, with the number of visits to our website, and with the click-throughs and the response to the e-newsletters that we're sending out to specialized audiences, whether it's meeting planners or general US travelers. I mentioned earlier the rental car challenge. This is just an example of one of our blogs that we put out, again, messaging, just making sure that people understand it's easy to get around Anchorage, and that we're staying ahead of the challenges and the concerns that might keep somebody from booking a trip to Anchorage in Alaska. Hotel performance through June. This really tells a story of growth in the last couple of months. If you look at demand for room nights on the left, you can see January, February, we were well below 2019 and well below 2020. And then look at what's happened. Look at where we are right now compared to 2019. That's just an amazing chart to me. 2 months ago, I would have been hopeful that we'd get halfway between the orange line and the yellow line. And then hotel revenue. This is a bit of a different chart in that it's January through June. So part of what's playing into 2021 there, if you look to the left, you can see we were well below 2019 and 2020 in the first 2 months of this year. But I'm hopeful that as the year progresses, that the 2021 bar will just continue to rise towards the 2019 number. 2019 numbers. So this is something that we really put out there, I believe, in 2019. This is a quote from a CEO of a Texas Convention and Visitors Bureau, Maura Gast. And this is really what destination marketing organizations such as Visit Anchorage are focused on for the future. It's about marketing, it's about attracting visitors, but it's really about community, and it's really about serving your residents. If you build a place that people want to visit, you build a place where people want to live. If you build a place where people want to live, you build a place where people want to work. And let's see if I can get back to it. And if you build a place where people want to work, you'll build a place where business has to be. And if you build a place where business has to be, you'll build a place where people have to visit. So throughout the pandemic, travel and tourism businesses persevered. We stuck with it. Hotels that normally might serve leisure travelers found themselves serving quarantining workers so that other Alaskan industries could continue. Restaurants had to reinvent their spaces and menus for curbside or meal prep at home. You probably read some of the stories about the creative ways that Salmonberry Tours kept their drivers busy delivering Christmas trees, delivering plants, helping delivery food bank meals. For Visit Anchorage's part, we created the Business Health and Safety Pledge. We administered one of the MOA's business relief programs. And we did other things to allow us to use our core competencies for the good of the community, although in a very different way. We are all still very committed to travel and tourism, despite the year that we just had. Sure, it is a way to make money for our businesses and families and for the community as well. But I think there is something in this quote much deeper about what travel and tourism can offer to a community. And while that quote begins and ends with visitors and spending, it's really about the entire virtuous cycle. And we think of travel and tourism as economic development's test drive or the first date for economic development. Overall, our mission always has been the same, and that's to get the best outcome possible for our community. And as we make gains this year, it's because we worked hard. And I'm not just talking about Visit Anchorage. I'm talking about the community and the visitor industry businesses. We are used to very proactive sales and marketing efforts, and that was really put to the test this year. But there is such an opportunity here to rebuild for the future with a product-based and itineraries that are more diversified and provide an even more appealing mix in the eyes of our potential visitors and those who are already dreaming of a trip to Alaska. So with that, I will end. I know Spencer said he may have had a couple of questions, or he would be monitoring for questions during the program, and he promised me that none of them would be hard, but we'll see. Spencer, what do you have?
Well, Julie, I just want to start and say, thank you so much for all that great information and analysis. And obviously that quote at the end really speaks to organizationally what we try to do around live, work, play, and just how tourism and visitation is so tied into economic development and people wanting to live here and continue to make this a great place to live. So thanks for that. That was perfect. If anyone has any questions, yes, please put them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to get to them here in the last 5 minutes or so we have. One of the things that I had written down before we started that I think you touched on at the end, but maybe you could expand on a little bit is, you've got members in the community here who are, I'm sure, looking to you to say, Julie, what can we expect? And kind of how do you tell them in terms of how they should be feeling and how do you keep them kind of optimistic? Or are these numbers going back up so quickly that's already there?
So the numbers are certainly going up more quickly than, and I think I said it, I would have guessed even 2 months ago, certainly more quickly than we would have guessed 6 months ago. So I think there's a sense of optimism, and I think it's a sense of optimism that is based in current reality. Both as international travel comes back, and that may be 6 months, a year, before we start even seeing just the opening of the return of international travel. And as US travelers become even more willing to actually book rather than just dream, we really do have a lot of optimism and a lot of real reason for optimism. Alaska and Anchorage really offer what the visitor is looking for right now, and I think what the visitor will be looking for in the future. So the optimism is real. The optimism is based on reality. There's still that hesitation, though. We know that the pandemic could change courses very quickly. Nobody saw this coming 20 months ago, right? So there's the hesitation there. We just need to know that as a community, we have to be very responsive to what may come next in the pandemic. And I think that there's optimism, though, especially this summer, businesses who have figured out how to serve a new market We do have some businesses who previously were really, 80, 90% reliant on cruise companies doing the marketing for them and delivering customers to their door. They've learned how to make offerings and itineraries and offer product to the independent traveler directly. So I'm very hopeful that as cruises return next year, that we will have a more level mix of the cruises and the independent traveler, and that everything will rise. And I don't think that that's unrealistic. I do think, though, that for the conventions and the meetings business, a lot of the business that keeps our hotels and restaurants full in the fall, winter, spring, it's a bit longer. I think events will come back, but the attendance may lag for a couple of years, but I think we'll get there. So there's definitely optimism, and I don't think it's just optimism because we're an optimistic industry. I think that we may not be that optimistic industry anymore. We're a very cautious industry now, doing everything we can to create our own optimism and create a better future than what we've experienced this past year.
Wow, what a great answer. I think you touched on a lot there and covered it. And I think that might be why we didn't get any questions. You were so comprehensive, Julie, that you answered everyone's questions before they got a chance to ask them. And so I just want to say thanks again for presenting today, all the great work that you do and Visit Anchorage does. I want to take a moment to thank, again, Alaska Executive Search and Bradison Management for helping us host these webinars. And to everyone who attended today and watched, I also want to make sure that I tease our upcoming webinar. On August 11th, we're going to be back at 10 a.m. and we're going to have members of Barings Investment Group to provide an overview of their organization and discuss key objectives and target investments of their Alaska Future Fund. So with that, I want to say thanks again, Julie, and to everyone who tuned in. We appreciate y'all. And thank you again, Alaska Executive Search and Bradison Management. And that's it for this great webinar today. Thanks again.